So, hi everybody. I'm Arshia Lokhandwala. I'm the curator of the exhibition currently on view, Ufuk, Zarina Tribute, at the Kamal Nayan Bajaj Gallery, which is presented by Sunaina Kejriwal. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the talk by Rubina Karode, who is the director and the chief curator of the Kiran Nadar Museum of Art in Delhi. As the exhibition concludes tomorrow, I'm grateful to Rubina for her talk, Zarina, One Long Afternoon Under the Shade of the Chinman, which is in conjunction with the exhibition. Zarina Hashmi, or Zarina, who preferred to be identified only by her first name, was born in Aligarh, India in 1937, was many things. A friend to many, and one of the first feminist Muslim artists from South Asia to work within a minimalist repertoire. An artist in exile, one, as she called herself, but most of all, an exemplary human being. She was kind and generous in her ways. And as for me, as a young student doing a PhD at Cornell University, she hosted me several times in a loft in New York as we discussed the art world, her work, and her life. However, my reason for curating the exhibition is not a personal gesture, but more to remember the incredible body of work that she left behind, which she made in an unwavering manner in spite of the financial hardships and the many challenges of being a Muslim South Asian woman in New York City, trying to carve a niche in the Western art world. Zarina's huge legacy recounts innumerable works that address the idea of contested borders, boundaries, and disputed territories in which her memories are presented as maps and constellations, many in search for her home. I do remember Zarina mentioning several times the loss of a language, her mother tongue Urdu, which was very important to her, and hence her need to constantly use it in her work as a way to historicize it. While exploring possible titles for the show, I came across her work Ufuk from 2001, a woodcut, which in Urdu means horizon. And it really hit the right note and resonated at many levels, as it also addressed her journey into the other realm. So Zarina departed for her new abode on April 25th, 2020, leaving us with a huge void. The exhibition Ufuk is an invitation to 10 artists to celebrate her artistic and intellectual legacy that is visible through her myriad monochromatic prints, papier-mâché sculptures, and installations. Each of the participating artists have responded to her own practice in their own individual manner that allows me, through my exhibition, to historicize her legacy and contribution as an artist. It also gives me a great pleasure today to introduce the speaker of this evening, Rubina Karode, who is the director and the chief curator of the Kiran Nadar Museum of Art, the first private modern and contemporary art museum in India. She's also on the International Asian Art Council member of Vancouver Art Gallery in Canada. Karode specializes in art history and in education and has been involved with teaching of Western and Indian art history from the 1990s to 2006 at various institutions, mainly the School of Art and Aesthetics, Jawaharlal Nehru University, the National Museum Institute, the College of Art, and Jamia Millia Islamia University in New Delhi. Karode was awarded the Fulbright Scholarship in 2000 and was placed as a visiting scholar at the Mills College in California, where she curated Resonance, an exhibition on Californian painters and sculptors from the Mills College of Art collection. As a critique, she continues to contribute thematic essays and reviews to art journals such as Art India, for example. She has written extensive monographs of contemporary Indian artists across generations and for cross-cultural collaborations. So Rubina has an illustrious exhibition history to her credit, including the co-curating of the exhibition Tiger by the Tail, Women Artists of India, Transforming Culture in 2008, showcasing contemporary art by 17 women artists in India at the Women's Studies Research Center, Brandeis University. She also curated the Indian Pavilion, Our Time for a Future Caring, at the 58th International Art Exhibition in 2019 at the Venice Biennale, which was organized by the Ministry of Culture in collaboration with the KNMA Museum of Art. At the KNMA a long list. She has a long list of curated exhibitions, which included a major retrospective on Nalini Malani titled "You Can't Keep Acid in a Paper Bag" from 2004. Difficult Love, a three-part exhibition that included a retrospective on Nasreen Mohammadi titled "A View to Infinity" in 2000. At the KNMA, a long list of curated exhibitions includes a major retrospective on Nalini Malani titled "You Can't Keep Acid in the Bag" from 2014. Difficult Loves, a three-part exhibition that included a retrospective on Nasreen Mohammadi titled "A View to Infinity" from 2013. An exhibition which also included Amrita Shergill titled "A Self in the Making" and a constellation of the younger women contemporaries titled "Seven Contemporaries." Subsequently, she also organized a retrospective Nasreen Mohammadi, an exhibition with the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and the Museum Nacional Center de Reina Sofia in Spain in collaboration with the Kiran Nadar Museum in 2016. In 2019, she curated Arpita Singh's Submergence in the Midst of Here and There, 6 decades of painting, along with Amar Kanwar in the same year, Such a Morning. But in January of 2020, she curated Zarina Life in 9 lines across decades, borders, and geography, when Zarina was still with us. Her exhibition closely examines Zarina's obsession with paper, showcasing her woodcut prints, lithographs, and etchings, along with few sculptural objects. We are able to view not only her most significant work of the artist, we were able to view only her most significant work, but the exhibition also allowed us to make links with the artist's fascination with architecture and obsession with symmetry and the interaction with varied cultures that influenced her work, allowing the artist to make work about her life and her longing to go home wherever it may be. So before I hand you over to Rubina, I just found this very poignant quote, actually just this morning, and I'm going to read it. I quote, "I'm only a small part of a big universe, but we all have stories to tell. And I'm already 80 years old and time is running out. To quote the Palestinian poet, Muhammad Darwish, I don't have enough time to tie my end to my beginnings. I have learned a lot from my wanderings around the world, and I've always been very cautious about how other people live. Now in my old age, I want to go back to where I started. I often wonder what my life would have been like had I never left my house of 4 walls in India. I will never know the privilege of living out my days in the country in which I was born, speaking in my mother tongue. There is truth to the phrase, you can never go home again. I do not feel at home anywhere, but the idea of home follows me wherever I go. In dreams and on sleepless nights, the fragrance of the garden, images of the sky, and the sound of language returns. I go back to the road I have crossed many times. They are my companions and my solace. And it is my wish that of course, that she has found her home that she has been seeking all her life. But before I conclude, I would like to very much thank Sunaina Kejriwal and her amazing team at the Kamal Nayan Bajaj Gallery, without whom I couldn't have done this exhibition. Rubina Karode, I'm really grateful to you for this amazing lecture and for you agreeing to speak at such a short notice. I know that you've been unwell, and I do appreciate you being here with us at this moment. So thank you. And finally, and most of all, I'd like to thank the 10 artists who are participating in my exhibition. Many of them have been very kind enough to make new work, which resonated with the idea of Zarina Hashmi. And these include Anita Dubey, Ankush Safia, Asta Butail, Himali Bruta, Mitu Sen, Parul Gupta, Shaurya Kumar, Shambhavi Singh, Shreyas Karle, and Vikas Khan. And so thank you everybody for joining us this evening. And with much ado, Rubina, I hand you the stage. So thank you.
I want to thank Arshia for the very generous introduction. I want to thank Sunaina Kejriwal for inviting me. Both of you, thank you very much for this opportunity and for presenting us such a beautiful exhibition. I think beautiful exhibitions inspire us to do many things. And one of the reasons for this talk is that exhibition that I saw in Mumbai called Ufak, curated by Arshia, with amazing works, almost paying a tribute to the legacy of Zarina in one sense. And I was drawn to its title because Ufak, which means horizon, is also what Zarina was drawn to. It is where two worlds, the visible and invisible, appear to meet. And she always lived in that moment where her two worlds could meet. They met, didn't meet, but that was where she was, always looking at the horizon. I want to go back straight away to 2001 when I first met Zarina at the Mills College in California. She was there to put up an exhibition that was being curated by Marianne Milford Lutzker, who was a guest curator, but who was also the dean of the college, and who had invited Zarina to put up or show, bring together 10 years works, 1991 to 2001. And that's where I met Zarina first properly. And we sat down, and Marian was very generous, inviting me to participate in the show, assist Zarina in installing the show, and also invited me to contribute an essay towards that exhibition, which I did. That is when my observations on Zarina began. It was a large show, and the title of my show today comes from an unforgettable memory of that moment at the opening, when there was a lot of attention and audience, looking around, some really trying to see something familiar in Zarina's work and fit her into the existing rubric of minimalism, some trying to decode her images and understand what they were. And then here Zarina and I were standing, and two American friends were having a conversation and saying something about a particular work. And Zarina looked at me and said, you see, this is what happens. A whole lot of things get lost in translation. And I looked at her and she says, the work that they're looking at, how can they ever understand that what happens in India in scorching summer in North India is mothers put on these curtains or blinds of dried grass, and then they water them so that cool breeze comes into the house, and also the fragrance of the earth scent, the scent of the earth also completely takes over the house. And that's when we kill that hot breeze and a cool breeze really takes over. Now, how do we really translate this? It is at that point that we started having a conversation around this. What gets lost in translation, what gets preserved in art, what kinds of new interpretations come about, and how a work is received in different environments. It was very interesting that Zarina mentioned that, because from that point of time, I started thinking more about a work which is so personal, so intimate, and comes completely from, is completely drenched in her life. What do we do when a work is so personal and intimate? How do we really look at it? I had several times tried to convince Zarina that I wanted to curate an exhibition of hers. And maybe the time was not right. Most times she was upset because she was denied a visa to India, or there were other bureaucratic procedures that really exhausted her. And she found hostility and was not really happy about the fact that this everything took so long in India, everything was so hostile, and that really did not happen. In 20 years later, when I started planning this major exhibition at KNMA, I was told by Renu Modi that Zarina was not keeping well, and that she had informed Zarina about this exhibition, but Zarina was busy learning to draw again. She was joining dots all over again. And that really numbed me for a moment. For a person whose entire life, entire art practice is about her life, about the memories, about the stories, about all her personal instances, moments, and stories, had now a fading memory. And she was struggling to draw that very motive that she had drawn for so many decades all along her life. This exhibition that I did at KNMA titled Zarina, A Life in 9 Lines, I have taken Zarina's words and is some kind of a curatorial homage that I really wanted to present to Zarina. She was alive then, but unfortunately, she could never visit the exhibition and she passed away while the exhibition was on. I want to start by saying that I find Zarina one of South Asia's finest abstractionists. You know, when it's really her work, I think, has such depth, such intensity, and such power. And when I try to understand her monochromatic abstractions, accompanied by poetic ruminations on exile, on trauma of the partition, and the displacement of her family, I think she stands alone there in terms of how she really presented or how really she came to a language in her art that really radically challenged the narratives of modern and contemporary art for multiple reasons. Her art offers a perspective radically different from the mainstream narratives of modernism, historically shaped by Euro-American and male-dominated discourses. But here was Zarina actually drawing upon her own energies, her own inner strengths, and evolving a austere language, very subtle and sophisticated in the way that she presented her life subject. It was drenched in her personal life and yet was accessible and legible and precise and clear. I was drawn to her practice, especially her vocabulary of bare bones, you know, the power that her image would wield, you know, and most importantly, a practice that obsessively revolved around home and belonging, the image of a home, a heavily condensed metaphor referring to spiritual, psychological, familial, linguistic, national, cosmopolitan sense of belonging and habitation, all at once. Home that is both familiar as well as foreign. Home that is close as well as distant. Home as corporeal as well as ephemeral, all at the same time. Home, a form embodied with memories of lived experiences. I want to draw your attention to the fact that what I just said about Zarina's practice, the use of bare minimal visual elements and clean, neat geometry. And most times her work really was about architectural floor plans or drawn by hand. This is Ghar, and it is from one of her series. She always worked in series. She never did a single work as such. It really spilled out into a series of works. And Ghar, home, house. This is where I think this is the central image of her work, most important image in her oeuvre, which she keeps going back to. And home becomes really the place of her ruminations and reiterations. It's a recurrent motive. Throughout her life, she was going back and forth to the notion of home and belonging. Next. But this all did not start all at once. It's good to know her background, so to understand that she was born in a Muslim family and lived in Aligarh, and her father was a historian who taught at the Aligarh University. Her home was a home of books, library, a lot of books and maps were there. Her father really evoked interest in architecture for her, in books for her, in travel, in maps. And young Zarina was really very fascinated by these things. In fact, she was really fascinated by books, firstly, because of the quality of paper, the feel of paper, the touch of paper, the smell of paper, how paper could take imprints and impressions on it, how a small form of a book could actually contain volumes of a lifetime, how one could keep returning to the book, to the paper, to the book, to the print, and how text and image could play themselves out in a very small format. And this is something that excited Zarina, and she spoke at length about this. Secondly, she was very interested in travel. She loved to fly. She wanted to be a pilot. She wanted to really cross borders, cross geographies, go to distant lands. But all that happened much later. But she was very much into travel. And her father used to take her to architectural sites, to monuments. And she was very inspired when she visited Lahori Mosque in Lahore, or Fatehpur Sikri, the whole Fatehpur Sikri structures, the city. And she started gathering and observing very keenly architecture and its place in the world, or its place in the face of the earth. Her early works, you would see, would have these kind of very interesting edges, precarious lines, precarious edges, corners, jalis, traceries. Next, please. Fortresses, courtyards, open spaces, enclosing spaces, and how in architecture, especially in Islamic architecture, there is this very interesting play between movement and pause. So you come through the arcades, you come cross the arcades, you come into an open courtyard space, you cross the courtyard space, you catch some shadows, you get into the interior spaces. All this was very fascinating for her to experience and observe. Next, please. Or small windows, openings from which light filtered in. You know, how this idea of the mosque, you know, receiving air and light was important to her to understand. Also, the palette that she later on embraced, the idea of light and dark, or white and black. Next, please. The other thing she was fascinated by was language, Urdu. I've already talked about books, and she came from a family which really was cultured and cultivated an etiquette of how Urdu played a role in your life. It refined you, it refined your sensibilities. Very interestingly, the idea that often in cultures where Urdu is spoken, there are question and answers, you know, that happen by sharing shairis or giving reply, one person saying a couplet, the other one answering by a couplet, and there is this play of, you know, making instant haikus out of you know, your thoughts, your ideas, your imagination, and your expression. This is something that she grew up with, the idea of this language, which unfortunately for her was something that was on the verge of extinction, and she was in one sense salvaging it, bringing it back in her work, handwritten Urdu words that she very much incorporated within her work. Um, this is a shot from an exhibition view from KNMA, and I made these arches drawing, looking at a photograph, a picture of her house in Aligarh, which had similar arches, and arches through which you enter a world. And the first thing that you actually encounter is a huge space in which there are Urdu words floating, and a image of Abba's house, father's house, which remains the house that she's always referring to when she talks about home. And that's her childhood home. That's where the family was together. That's where the family separated during the partition. Half of the family went to Pakistan, half stayed here. And that's where the displacement of a family life began. When you look at these Urdu words, I deliberately did not write the English translations, which could be seen at some other place in the exhibition. But these are all words that came from titles of Zarina's works, whether it be ghar, hudud, fasla, distance, um, andhera, darkness, all of these words, wall, diwar. Um, so these words I picked up and actually put them out there because they were all titles of her work. And I was interested in that because Zarina always told me that in my practice, work precedes the image. The work is the first thing that comes to me, like a poet. She had a word in mind, and that really led to the image in her work. And often when she did series of works, she would actually collect a list of words, and then those words used to translate into images of different kinds. So that is the starting point. I also thought that it was important to talk about her early works because most times we think of Zarina, when we talk about Zarina, we look at her mature works, which are bare and which are sparse and which have a very austere kind of minimal character. But when she started, she started with the rawness and the bareness and the paleness of paper. She was playing with paper. She was trying to understand it. She was actually touching it, feeling it, molding it, staining it, kneading it, doing everything, testing the resilience of paper as a medium vis-a-vis easel painting or something else. She was someone who was really interested in printmaking. She was someone who was interested in exploring the beauty, the fragility of paper, the resilience of paper, often calling it as human skin, almost like human skin. It changes color, it changes texture, it is raw, it is smooth, it has textures of different kinds, it has nuances of different kinds. It takes in things, it impresses things very differently upon itself. So it all started with a play with paper. And her early moldings, her paper pulp sculptures, her pulp prints, her relief prints became very interesting to put together because she was really trying to make the paper pulp herself. She was at the same time learning how to really make the pulp of a print, what all would go into it, what could be the way that it could hold itself and a form could be made out of it. How can she carve within these sculptural forms? What would she do with this medium is what her preoccupation was. And in the first area in this exhibition, you do see a juxtaposition of her early prints with her pulp sculptures. Next, please. This is the wall. Next. 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 Against what you see as floor plan of Abba's house, one of her early series, or rather series that followed, was Amma's garden, actually. And in that, it's very interesting that whenever she talked about Abba's house, it was always articulated in a severe geometry. But Amma's garden had these fluid spaces. And obviously, when Zarina was doing that, she was thinking about her own house in Aligarh, which had two parts. One, the male domain, so to say, the public domain in one sense, and the private space or the zanana spaces where her mother nurtured a garden. And that's where she played with her sisters and brothers, sang songs, sat with her mother, stared at the stars, recited poetry, and really also grew very close to nature, was very fond of plants. Her mother was very fond of plants. She would be waiting for the motia to blossom. She would be looking at each and every flower that was put in. She would choose flowers according to their fragrances. And Zarina would talk about all these with great passion, that she was so interested in what her mother was doing, she grew up learning about scents and fragrances, and she said she would even recognize those scents and relate them with personality of people as well, because that is what would happen every evening. Kapoor would be burned on the charcoal, and there would be this would be done as a practice to ward off evil spirits. These are very interesting little things, that really lingered on with her in her memory. And a whole series of it was done by her, which was called part of Amma's garden. This is, of course, Rani's garden. And she always talked about how the architecture of that garden really was her first learning about geometry. The way the bricks, the terracotta bricks were baked and put very, very diligent in very, very clean, precise, in a precise row, where plants were to be grown, habitation was to be grown. How that courtyard really fascinated her in terms of learning about simple architectural elements and their role in the making of a home or a house. Next, please. So these are very unusual works of Zarina, in fact, as you can see. They are sculptural, they are they are small in size, but they have a monumental form in the way, and they are sensual in that sense. Material is very much apparent in the way that she has used it. Next, please. Again, etchings on paper, very different works than what follows later in her practice. Next, please. For Abba, etching on paper. Next. And paper, cast paper works like this called Ghar, house. Next. Another house that you see from an aerial view. Next. Closely how she gave it a silver, she silver foiled it. Twisted house. Next. So this house recurrent motif, I'm very drawn to. She used that as almost like a generic form, okay, a protective enclosure, which really was an envelope made in 9 lines. Okay, that is throughout. You will see that house comes is a recurrent motif used in different iterations, of course, and sometimes in a series, sometimes it becomes something else, but it's all going back to that one envelope house, a house form, a generic house form that she uses to speak and to speak of several things that happened in her life through just that very one recurrent motif. So here is one morning the city was golden, but what you see here could be a wall, could be a fence, but you just see the repetition of a single house form. Next, please. Another work, which is a cast paper of a wall. Next. In the 70s, when she went to, after a lot of wandering and going through different cities and countries, she landed up in New York. She talks about how she did not know what to do. She was clueless how to go about, and she spent a lot of time in the early 70s just sitting and piercing paper with a needle. And there is a whole set of works that she did, which were with a sewing needle. You can see the perforations, just aimlessly trying to pierce paper, paper after paper, paper after paper, and really figuring out, what she was supposed to do or what she was going to do. I think a kind of a mind that was really looking for how she is going to really articulate what all she has experienced into a form that would appeal to her, most importantly, and to the world, and be accessible to the world. Next, please. Another work which I really like, embossed white. These whites on whites are very special, and I think a lot of people have not seen them, but they are very fascinating to me. And for me, it has, I must have seen these images 1,000 times, her works several times, and I have started seeing the house everywhere. For instance, this is a family portrait hung in a room, and I see the wire on which it is hung and the empty frame as a house form. everything translates or boils down to the generic house form. And of course, it's very potent because the portrait is empty. It's almost as if there is nobody left. The portrait, the home is now a barren place, a deserted place, a deserted family. Next, please. The iterations on the house continue in different mediums, in different forms. Next, please. And I'm showing a few of them. So then she daily makes little houses on wheels, or she makes them as houses on the wall. Next, or puts wheels on them so that they become mobile homes, mobile house. Next, increases its portability so that she can carry the house with her, a bag house with her. Next, flattens it out so that it can actually be portable. Next, or shows the house moving, that she is moving and so is the house moving with her. It goes wherever she goes. And that's how she creates innumerable, I've just shown 4 or 5, 6 ways in how she has really used that generic form of the house and created different forms and loaded them with different meanings. Next, please. Before I go to this series, I want to say that both architecture, or rather geometry and poetry, I don't think I've seen works, very few works in which geometry and poetry actually come together to make meaning so beautifully as in Zarina. The image is incomplete without the word, and the word incomplete without the image. And both have their place in the way that she brings them together in her expression. This is the house in 9 lines. I was very drawn by this elemental image when I started working on this exhibition. And then it says, homes I made. She lived in different countries, different cities, we know that. And this is a series of work in which she has drawn floor plans of all the houses she lived in, whether in Thailand, whether in Paris, whether in some other place, in Tokyo, wherever she lived, she has drawn the bare house or the bare plan, the layout plan, and actually drawn them out by hand to talk about the homes in which she lived. She never made them, but she lived in those spaces. Okay, this is about that. But going back to 9 lines, I'm sure that Zarina was very interested in numbers and numerology. She was interested in the mystical quality of numbers, like the mystical quality of geometry, the mystical quality of numbers. And in Sufism, which I know she read and she was drawn to, and she referred to and she was inspired by. In Sufism, number 9 is a very auspicious number. It's a number of culmination. It's a number of something getting over and a new beginning happening. So 9 really has a very important place. It's almost like you're culminating something and already stepping out for a new beginning. I used to talk to her about numbers at times, and which I did also with Nasreen, who was also fascinated by Sufi interpretations of Sufic interpretations of numbers. Okay, the 9 number is also very a number of finality, because if you look at the tables of 9, if you look at the tables of 9, 9 into 1 is 9, 9 into 2 is 18, 9 into 3 is 27. All the digits that you add up will add up to number 9. 9 2s are 18, 1 plus 8 is 9, 9 3s are 27, 2 plus 7 is 9. Okay, now these games of numbers, I'm just bringing in and dropping this here, not to say that she created this in 9 lines because of this, but I'm trying to say that she had a fascination for numbers, for geometry, for maps, okay, and for text. And there is an interplay between them that happens all the time in her work. Next, please. But I want you to closely look at this work, A Life in 9 Lines. This is the entire set of prints. And what really comes to us when as viewers we see it is the absence of, I mean, it's so raw, it's so austere, it's so bare. It's almost like it speaks of abandonment of a house. It speaks of this is something that I have always felt that when we look at Zarina drawing the house, is she drawing
practice kar lo beta.
when Zarina is actually drawing a house form, she is drawing a house not as a house that has to be built, you know, but she is drawing to get back in her memory, remembering Abba's house, remembering the spaces she had lived in, remembering how she navigated those spaces in Abba's house, and the evocation of those moments spent in those spaces is why she draws the layout plan.
तुम्हारी memory में फर्क पड़ता है तो
somebody is disturbance, somebody is talking and I'm getting, excuse me, somebody is having a conversation and I'm not able to hear my voice. Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Sorry.
I request everybody to be muted, please. Please put your video and on mute so Rubina can continue the conversation. Thank you so much.
So the floor plan, as an architect would make, is not made for the houses to be built, but it is to memorize those houses, to memorize the spaces that she had lived in, that she had experienced, that she had navigated day in and out. When I come to this set of homes, I almost feel as if she is, the nature of these images look as if they are drawing inspiration from catacombs, you know, from ruins. It's a house in ruin. It's an identity in ruin. It's a house in ruin. You know, it's a deserted, ruined house. It has that feel. And I think what works well here is the intensity of her solid black lines and the paleness of the paper. Also the absence of any domesticity. And it's completely an austere, bare form that she really captures and presents to us as a home in 9 lines. Next, please. The textures are there. These are never smooth surfaces. They're all rugged, raw surfaces that you can touch and feel in terms of in terms of their graininess. The lines are slightly uneven, hand drawn, and ink actually does seep into it. Next, please. She did works in series, and one of the series that was very important and close to her was called Letters from Home. And these were letters that her sister wrote to her, but never posted them to her, thinking that Zarina would get disturbed and would be pained by reading these letters. What was the content of the letters? The content of the letters was somebody died, something happened in the house, a wall fell down, somebody again died. So these letters talked about loss, personal loss, loss in the family of dear ones going away one after the other. And finally, the house also getting deserted, getting abandoned, and getting razed. Now, these letters, when they came to Zarina, Zarina actually thought of immortalizing them, you know, because they were written by her dear sister Rani to her. And this series of work, she actually used the Abba house image again, the floor plan, and impressed the letter, the content of the letter onto within the structure and the space of the house. This is a display image. Next, please. So this is how you see this Letters from Home. And actually, the full letter was impressed onto the geometry of her Abba's house, the house that really brought all of them together all the time. the house that was really something that they were holding on to, uh, um, even though they were not together there. What I find really touching and really very moving is the last of the prints in this 6 works, which is the extreme right one, in which she reprinted the first letter. And it was a very sad one. And then she blocked it by these very intense black lines, as if she just wanted to block out these memories, these painful memories of separation and loss. She was trying hard to really block them, and that's how she really tried to visually make that for herself, blocking out images, blocking out the letter lines for herself. And next, please. Next. I want to go back to her very rudimentary or elemental visual language, using line, dot, circle, square as her tools to really express and really make her work. And she would do anything to really reuse these images or these elements all the time. Just her play was very limited in this kind of a vocabulary of using the basic visual elements. So she could use a line and draw a courtyard, 4 lines, and then write something, a couplet on it, an Urdu couplet on it, or a something from her memory, and that would become her work. And she would title it Echo, or the Echo was titled first, and then the image really came about. Next, please. This is perhaps the work that I spent my most time, because it's very dear to my heart, this work. Home is a Foreign Place. It's a set of 36 prints. And this is where I really started admiring Zarina's abstraction, her power of abstraction, her way of working. When we saw the earlier works, she was perhaps those are the only works in where she used color. You see terra rosa color, you see burnt umber color. She learned about colors, she mixed them in the paper pulp, and she made those images with silver, with burnt umber, with terracotta colors. But as she moved along, she really chose and embraced a monochromatic palette. And she was completely sold on to the idea of the black and white, or the black and the of the black and the contrary color. So when we come to Home is a Foreign Place, it's completely a play of lines, colors, their position. Where they are positioned makes all the difference. Wherever she touches them, places them, meanings alter. All within a set of 36 works, she is talking about that home, which is now a foreign place. And I remember that she has written this also extensively about it. She used to beautifully write as well. That when she was thinking about this work, she listed names or words, all words that came to her mind that embodied the image of the home for her. A wall, a roof, a ceiling, horizon, stars, distance, darkness, window. Many of these, all these have titles in Urdu that she wrote herself, and each one has a particular kind of image that she came about. And I think this is perhaps the best or the most beautiful example of how she could push the limits of architectural abstraction in her work. I think it is so potent and so amazing in the way her mind and her fertile imagination worked in terms of how to use and play with the bare bones of geometry. Next, please. So here you look, darwaza, door. There's a door there. Chaukhut, diwar, This is how the series go on, and they are uneven lines, as you can see, hand drawn, and very. I think in Urdu they say that your expression must have nazakat. Nazakat is elegance. Elegance is extremely important, and also uh, what is and tehzeeb. Tehzeeb is basically an etiquette, a composure of mind. So with that composure and that kind of that level of elegance and subtlety, she really made these images. Next, please. Now, when you watch these three works, what is she doing? She's just playing with the position of the lines on the page. So here is Rasta, road. Here is threshold, chaukhut. Here is dopair, if I'm reading it right. Yes, because that is the fan. And I'm just trying to show how she's working on in making her image. Next, please. And this is really beautiful. This is called Sae, shadow, almost like a shadow disappearing, which you would see in Islamic architecture all the time. The courtyard would actually, the shadow would get longer, and then by the day it gets over, it would gradually disappear into the edges. Sham, evening, and Andhera, Raat. So when you are in evening, you see the duality. When you come to Andhera, you see complete darkness. Next, please. And it goes on. Play with lines, where she's placing them, and how she is using it to really convey all the fractured experiences are coming back. I think any one single contour gets contained by the memories that she carried. And it's amazing that she is trying to reconstruct a house or a home using the very elements, the very building elements of, or the building blocks of the house. For her, they carried very, very deep personal and vivid memories. But here, as we see, it is that simple. Just the way that she expressed. It's, I think we were taught when we were students, minimum of means and maximum of expression. And I think that was taught in the context of Brancusi's work. But I think I can very well use it here, that it is here you see small works and minimum of means and maximum of expression is what she actually was able to come to. Next, please. I wanted to stress this point even further, that how her imagination worked. It's very interesting. When you read what she writes, at times she's talking about, I am making my life the subject of my work because I want to know that what I am making and expressing is real and not imagined. It's everything that I have lived with. It's everything I've lived and lost. Okay. It's something that I know happened. It is with me, even if it is absent, it is with me. And it stretched to such extent that even when she was gazing at stars, the constellation, she was seeing the house form there, as you can see in this constellation, Sitare. She's actually joining dots, and we see the constellation turn into a house form. That kind of obsessive working and reworking of her one singular theme. Next, please. Coming to Folding House. This is another very beautiful set of 25, but it's a collage. And she has used handmade paper again, stained with Sumi ink. She has stained the paper with ink and used gold along with it. Now, the folding house. And often she talks about how, for me, I'm always folding and unfolding the house. I'm packing and unpacking the house. I am carrying it with me. I'm leaving it behind. House is really where everything is for her. Everything that just takes her to her house. Now, in the folding house, what I find again very, very pertinent is the use of one single generic house form, which is common to all the works in the series. But what she does with it is amazing. Next, please. Look at the first image that I'm showing. I've just chosen some images. In the first image, you're seeing actually the dividing line, the line between the partition. The partition, which was something that she always, I think the work revolved around it to a great extent, because that's where the disintegration of the family began, with the partition being announced. And that disintegration really completely threw the family out of gear. Partition for her was something that was a bleeding wound, and she talked about it very often, what all it brought to her. In fact, I think this whole idea of nation formations was something that she hold accountable to her to her life. What happened to her life, why her identity was in ruins, was because of the way the partition really affected a very close-knit family living happily in Aligarh. So here you see this dividing line, which is also the line between India and Pakistan. And for me, this evokes a Urdu couplet, where it's all about lightning striking your home, वो बिजली गिरी और सारा चमन जला दिया, which means that just one flash of lightning, one thunderous lightning really created, cracked really the land apart, or broke the land apart, and that was something that comes through in such a minimal expression. Second one, she has drawn the house but sealed it forever, as you can see. Third one, it's almost like a house being eaten away because of being abandoned, or just because there are no loved ones there anymore to nurture it. Next, please. And it goes on. I've not chosen many images, but there are multiple images in that work where she's showing a house with a desecrated land. She's showing a house like a Kaaba with a black and gold, the use of black and gold, which is almost like a pilgrimage place, a sacred place. So there are all these connotations and interpretations that she brings about by just a subtle intervention into the house form, and makes a series called The Folding House. And The Folding House, she continued to do till she lived. She was always talking about how I'm still folding houses and unfolding them. Next, please. Gradually, from a house very clearly drawn in the layout of Abba's house plan, to the houses she built in different cities, or the homes she made in different cities, to coming to Home is a Foreign Place, to now coming to Folding House, to later works. What I started seeing and noticing and observing in the later works from 2014 onwards is that the house really now becomes a puzzle, a labyrinth at times, a puzzle at times. It's something that she is now breaking the definite plan of the house, and it has opening up, it has entries, it has exits, sometimes no entry, no exit. It's turning into a puzzle. It could be because of her growing age, growing years. She was growing up. She was growing. Her age was actually, her memory was fading. She was between forgetting and remembering all the time. And the house now takes on this kind of a character. And next, please. And a series of work, actually very beautifully done, are almost like mats and curtains. Again, she goes back to that, weaving strips of paper in white and gold, and creating this kind of a labyrinth or a pattern, a very, very psychedelic pattern, or a optical pattern in one sense. And we are left to actually find the house from this maze. And I've just blown a detail to show you the house where it appears. So she started doing works which had in which then the house is to be found, to be discovered, like a puzzle. You are now in a maze, and you have to look for the house that she was also looking for. Next, please. Another work of that kind, where she is again trying to place the house in the whites somewhere. Next. And then from there, she comes here to this house, which is called the Shadow House, where house is now just a trace, a memory, a shadow of the house. And it is also by the time that she was making these works, the house was no more there. So she had no house to go back to. She had no house to return to. But the memory of the house was still very much there. That never really, that she carried along with her. You know, that she continued to evoke. She continued to evoke in her work the memory of that house that was gone, that was razed, that was left by everyone, that was lost. And that sense of loss always really made it imperative to really have live with that house. And when I see such a work which has so much of her meditative exercise gone into it, in the way that she disciplined herself to work with such control and such precision, to really to evacuate the body of the house literally, and to have this kind of a fragile membrane, you know, that just remains to talk about the house. I think it's a great example of a work where she has really now immaterialized the house. You know, it has become a shadow. It has become that kind of a haunted memory. Next, please. And from there, I want to come to the frailest house. So you will see that some of these titles also point towards that. And when I first saw this work, I was stunned, because I was thinking, what is she doing here? Because she has not directly drawn on the surface of the paper. She has actually created these traceries, these linear traceries, by rubbing graphite onto them, and then she has cut these strips. And after cutting them, she has tried to really create the maze that I have been talking about, the house. The house, where is the house here? The house is everywhere. You know, the house has multiplied multifold times, you know. Every little corner, I mean, you can actually move your finger and say, okay, this is a house, this is a house. So a house that is endlessly being drawn becomes grows into this kind of a large maze. And this is so frail. Actually, it is so frail that at this point, it is almost, if you touch it, it might just disintegrate or disappear. So the frailest house is an expression of that kind of meaning for her, a kind of a thing that kind of experience that she was still trying to really hold on to, her house that had become so frail, so old, so feeble, so abandoned. Next, please. One of the shots of the exhibition, but I'll skip this. Next, please. And then we see Zarina from her monochromatic palette turn towards a use of a lot of gold. You know, and she really liked to work with gold, and gold was important for her because it had also connotations which were spiritual. And she was it's very interesting that when she was using gold, she was also simultaneously making very dark images. In fact, her later works from 2010 or 15 onwards were images where you could barely see. You would struggle to see and carve out or actually get to the image in that enveloped in darkness. And so there was this contrast of light and dark that played out very strongly in her later works. And she talked about Noor, she talked about light, she talked about divine light. And she also talked about how when there is darkness and when there is immense darkness, you start going towards the light. And in these works, she used gold in a very generous way. But what I find very how do I say, something very powerful that happens here is the way that she makes these cuts into the gold, into the skin of the gold. And she has really, almost as if she's always someone who has loved to enter into spaces, there are, either through blinds, through veils, through slits, through corners, and these very delicate lines, almost like very sharp cuts add a dimension to the way that the work is conceived. Next, please. She also made Noor in sculptural form. She went back to, in one of the exhibitions, even at Mills, in the exhibition that Marianne had curated, there was a huge tasbih. Okay, and when I talked about nazakat, and I talked about when I talked about nazakat, I also wanted to talk about aqidat. Aqidat is faith, and faith was very important for her. She was not a practicing Muslim, but she was somebody who was drawn to the faith, drawn to faith of it. She was drawn to faith in a very spiritual way. And I remember, and I saw at Arshiya's exhibition only, where there is a recording, there's a video playing of Zarina, where some person asked her that, so how does it feel being a Muslim artist in New York? And she says that, well, I'm more than that, or I have more things than being just a Muslim artist, And this remains throughout, even in the 1970s when she lands up in New York, she is very much part of the feminist group there. She also was part of the magazine called Heresies. When I first met her in New York in her house, I met Howard Anna Fewell there. I met many other artists in her house, and she was welcoming. She was someone who really would bring the whole world into a little loft, which Arshiya was also saying about. She was very generous, and she would show you parties, have people there, all sorts of people. I mean, Krishna Reddy, Vijay Kumar, Meera Nair, Amitabh Ghosh, many of such people used to be there, and a very, very vibrant environment would be there, would be created. It was her home. It was also her studio, and so she had this thing that she was in a place which was very tricky, actually. When I was in California, she spoke to me about it, that on the one hand, you are identified as a Muslim artist, okay? On the other hand, you can also be questioned if you're a practicing Muslim artist, okay? And so the identitarian notions were there in her work. Of course, they played a role in her work, but I think she was able to bring such subtle grace in the way that she embedded her work with these symbols and signs of her culture and her faith, so to say. But yes, she was someone who spoke about faith at length. And when she goes to making these tasbihs, I also realized that she goes back to the sculptural form again, which she had started with when, in her early years. And you see these tasbihs, one of the tasbihs was made in sandalwood. So going back to fragrances, scents that she grew up with, also the touch and feel of things, of objects. And tasbihs are basically rosary, which you actually must touch and move around and, chant through it. So there is something more that the tasbih takes, in terms of touch, in terms of its fragrance, and things like that. And they become really here, they grow in scale as objects that she puts up in the work. She also worked with bulbs, light bulbs. Again, in the realm of spirituality, she really created those kinds of arcs in which there were bulbs. These bulbs were not bulbs that could be lit. These were bulbs which were made in marble or some other stone, but really represented experiences that came from her travels to mosques in different parts of the world, or to culture, or to Islamic, shrines and Sufi places. Next, please. And my dark house at Aligarh, as I was saying, that the last works really had a very dark presence. Almost the entire surface of the paper, she turned dark. And in the darkness, everything would held itself together. This is a threshold, of course, and a house that she is entering. It could also be the tunnel at the end of life, the tunnel of life. It could be something, it's a transiting space anyway. And so she's transiting. She knew that she was going. She talked about death at times. Her last trip to India, when I met her, she talked a lot about death. And she talked about Makan. And I want to bring here an evocation that when I go back to the point of cultural translation, or the point of what is lost in translation, in Urdu, there are sometimes no words that can appropriately translate the meaning of a particular word in Urdu. Okay. For instance, distance can mean fasla, distance can mean measure, distance can mean even something else. Okay. So now muddat may mean time, but muddat can also mean span. Muddat can also mean something else. Okay. There are nuances in the way that the word will be used. And she used to talk about makan. And makan in Urdu is, of course, house or home. That house, makan. Now this makan, at times when she was referring to, it was referring to the final makan, or the maqam, that resting place. And I here remember that I'm just remembering right now Bahadur Shah Zafar's couplet when he was confined and in home arrest in Rangoon, when he was on his dying bed. He wrote couplets, and it's a very famous of his poem. Lagta nahi hai dil mera ujde diyar mein. I'm not enjoying being in this deserted place. But in the last line, he said, umr daraz mang ke laaye the 4 din, do arzu mein kat gaye, do intezar mein. And it goes on. And then comes kitna badnaseeb hai zafar dafn ke liye, do 4 gaz zameen mili kuए yaar mein. How unfortunate and unlucky am I that I don't even have a resting place in my own. And that kind of evocation of makan, I think for Zarina, that was important. She was also thinking about it. She was constantly thinking about makan, my final resting place. In Islam, it is important where you rest finally, because that is your final abode. That is your final makan. And so the house, as I said in the beginning, starts from a very corporeal, physical house of belonging, house of family, and then takes on many, many more dimensions as she starts working around this very pertinent theme that really made her practice so gripping. I feel that it is something that anyone can relate to. It's something that is so grounded in one's life, of having a home, of being blessed with a family, of not losing it. So, but for somebody like Zarina, who lived in doubt, lived in uncertainty, one of the most certain things was the love of her family and the home that she wanted to return to every night. She writes in her couplets also that every night all of us meet at Abba's house. Those kinds of couplets you find throughout, those kinds of expressions you find in her writings all the time. And so there is this whole story, a personal story of loss, of belonging, unbelonging, of home, being homeless and being roofless that she went through. And of course, when Arshia said, despite all of that, she knew that she could not return. And if she would return, then what? And I remember a very interesting anecdote I want to bring here, though it's a digression from Zarina's life. When I used to read about Marc Chagall, he was born in a small village in Russia, and then he lives in Paris all his life. He goes to Paris and never comes back to this little village of his. And when he was 90 years old, he was awarded he was given an honor, and he had to go back to his native village. And he contemplated and he really thought about it, whether he should go or not. And he decided not to go. The reason was that he had carried a village, an image in his mind, God knows how many years, 80 years ago, when he left that place. And he carried the fear that maybe when he now goes, it may all not be there. It may not be the same. And that really was an anxiety for him, that because that was his memory. That was something that he held on to all his life. And he did not want to lose that memory, did not want to lose that treasure that he holds so close to his chest. That was a native village where the fiddler was on the roof, and the girl with the girl with milk containers roamed around, and the gypsy played the tune and things like that. Now, in case of Zarina, she kept coming to India. It's not that she would not come, but every time she came, I'm sure she came in search of a home that really was not that home anymore, the home that she had left behind. And she talks about wanderings, and she talks about being in different places. In fact, often when I could not show all her works, of course, it's a huge corpus of work that she produced. But there are a series of works in which she has talked about cities and talked about countries, the atlas of my world, so to say, and where she's constantly questioning the idea of, bounded territories and raised cities and borders, and vis-a-vis the boundless universe. What is this cosmos? One could actually embrace it as the entire cosmos could be embraced as one's home. And that's also something that happens if you study her life journey or her artistic journey. She starts with home is a foreign place, but at the end, one of her last exhibitions that I saw was talked about home, the world as her home. So it's I think from an identity that she carried, she really, through her nomadic life, through her living in different places, through the way that she lived her life, she actually came to a very cosmopolitan kind of identity that she imbibed and embraced wherever she was. And that is where I think her work really stepped. It's a very cosmopolitan kind of an identity. She was gathering pieces everywhere that she went, and she was bringing all those experiences, putting them all into the container or the envelope or the enclosure called home.
Really incredible body of work that you shared. And also, there were so many works that you showed today that, we are familiar with home is a foreign place, but the nuance from where she really began using the line or converting that into these different forms, it's just kind of quite extraordinary. And I think, your talk today really did justice to the legacy of the artist, which is so wide, where she's taken one particular form and expanded, moved it around, made collage, layered it, had gold leaf, in a very concise manner. And I think, I think all of us, or most of us over here, have definitely met her. It's kind of quite incredible that the journey that her life had taken, that she consistently is just pushing her agenda in a very quiet manner, but very focused and directed, which, so when we are kind of looking at her entire legacy of her work, we're able to actually see, the different movements and the different forms which kind of come through and emerge. I particularly enjoyed the lovely nuances. I had no idea about the garden and Rani and the beauty that you shared. And thank you so much for that. It kind of, painted a very, humane picture of her in that house and of the way that we understand her. And with that, I was just wondering if anybody had any questions. About the presentation, or they'd want to ask, Rubina or me, any questions in regard to her work? Yes, Anita. Yeah, hi.
Hi, Rubina. What a wonderful, absolutely thank you. It's just so moving because the way you constructed the exhibition, all the details, it's like, it just brings back Zarina, and I just have no words to thank you. Yeah?
Thanks.
To start with, yes. Absolutely amazing. It's just so beautiful. Couple of things that I would like to just share is the amazing way in which Zarina, to my mind, connected the dots, Like, for example, Persian, the whole Persian thing of the nazakat, See, the whole Persian culture has this amazing thing. One, nazakat. Second, geometry. Okay? Yeah. Then her absolutely groundedness in her in Uttar Pradesh. Yeah. And then her travels all over the world, which connected her to minimalism. Yes. So, the amazing thing about Zarina is that she's able to connect all these incredibly diverse things, with the
Absolutely.
simplicity and the poignancy and the, what should I say? It's just all there. And yet it's so restrained. It's just like, it's actually heartbreaking, the whole. I just sometimes, because it comes out of actually, and it's a great exile's position,
Yes.
One, it's a great exile's position, and it's also an amazing work done by an artist regarding post-colonial ways of making work in a context which is very different, yet asserting an identity, not overstating it, just keeping it amazing, no? What
amazing.
What
Never
an
an-
achievement, yeah, absolutely. Hats off, totally.
It was never an easy. It was never an easy
How
purchase
can
of
it? Oh, yeah,
Muslim identity being thrown. No, it
Everything.
was never. It was so subtle.
Yeah.
I'm glad you used the word restraint, which is
Yes,
a very important word. Very,
Very,
very
very.
important word, because in families, especially in I don't know. I can only speak of Muslim families. The first thing that you are taught is the notion of restraint.
Yes, I know, understand that.
Yes, and restraint in expression is extremely important, and that's why sometimes I feel
I
that
know.
she was all the time. She had this whole storehouse of memories, huge
Right.
anecdotes to this. But when she processed the image was so frugal and
I
so
know,
simple
I know.
and so big,
Oh God,
and yet loaded.
Loaded, totally
It
loaded,
was
yeah.
filled in with associations and memories and
Yeah,
political pain and separation and loss,
Everything,
all of
yeah.
it inside. And that
But you're right.
really is something that
You're
I
right.
marvel. I
Yes.
marvel every time I look at her.
I look at it, yes, sure.
How could she just divide a page into two?
I know.
And two colors and say that this is day and night, or just 4 lines and say this is axis, or 2 lines and road, or 3 lines and this. I'm just it's something.
Can you see this? Look at that. In the context of where she was functioning, look at the scale. That's extraordinary, no? To do the greatest things at that scale. Wow, that's like anybody who's she didn't she just did these things at a scale which was intimate to her, which was actually practical also, because I know her studio, I remember visiting.
Yes.
Within her means, entirely functioned within her means, and as you said, restraint, and there's that Urdu word for it, lihaz.
Lihaz, yes.
Lihaz,
You have to. You have
yeah, this
the
lihaz
decorum. The
yeah,
decorum is
yeah,
so important.
absolutely.
You don't need to have.
Absolutely.
You don't need to be confrontational to make your
Yes,
point.
absolutely.
You know?
This
You
is
can say it through
absolutely.
in a poetic way, in a restrained way. You can say
Yeah,
it. You know, you can
yeah,
express it, and that's
yeah.
how she works. It's a that kind of abstraction where a very strong political position can come
Yeah.
through, but in
Yeah.
the most minimal way, in a most
Yeah, one more thing, Ravina.
yeah.
That look at, I mean, see, minimalism. If we look at the
Mm.
history of minimalism,
Yeah.
see, look at the other male artists involved. Now, she also entered into that territory
Yes.
in a way which is so feminist. So it's actually
Oh yes,
she's
yes.
you know what I mean. She seems to be a quiet, but she actually has taken on major things. Actually, you understand that? I mean, I've taken on the history of minimalism, all male dominated, like material dominated and all that,
Yes.
and done her things quietly, and that's tremendous. Like, yeah, I mean, it's radical feminism, yeah, to kind of.
It is radical
Yes,
feminism.
very,
Yes.
very, very lovely. Thank you
so
much. Yeah.
Thank you, Anita.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
for
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Very, very
Thank
important.
you. Yeah.
Thanks, Anita, for that.
Yeah.
Rohita Doshi is asking, could you tell us a little bit about the interaction between Nasreen and Zarina?
They met a couple of times. They met also at a Hayter's studio in Paris. William Hayter's studio. They both were together there at some point of time in the early 60s. And they knew about each other's work also. But I think their trajectories were different. I think Zarina's was very much of Zarina's trajectory was different. I think Nasreen was very much involved with it was a very interiorized kind of world for her. It was almost like she was exploring the unknown, an exploration beyond infinity. I think I know that Zarina and Nasreen were respected each other's works. But I also know that Zarina did feel that at some point of time, Nasreen's work did gain importance. But Zarina's work remained overlooked, at least in India, I think. They were, I mean, Renu Modi, who really supports, who really was the gallery in India for Zarina, showed several exhibitions of Zarina from time to time. And I remember seeing one as early as in 1991 or so. But I don't think a lot, she was seen very, keenly. Her work was not really, a lot of attention did not really, critical attention did not come to what she was doing then. And that was something that she expressed at times. So yeah, there are those things that. But they knew about each other's practice, and I tried to write a piece on both of them, which I never really published. I wrote for myself just to understand the idea of space and light, structure and light in their work. Because I was trying to understand how Zarina embraced Sufism and how Nasreen looked at Sufism and the Zen philosophy. I was trying to understand it. And also, as I said, their interest in there were some common interests, some common areas of interest, both in terms of both responded to paper and not canvas. Both loved to work in small formats. Both like the intimate scale of working. So there are, and both loved ink as a medium. So there are similarities in terms of the medium they chose, the format they chose, the expression that they were arriving at. There were some common shared interests. But I think the intention of the work was very different.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you so much. Is there any way one could actually read what you've written, which which talks about both of them and their work?
Yeah, I would have it somewhere, but I
Maybe
never.
you can share it
published.
with Sunaina and she
I-
can share it with us.
I can
Thank you.
share. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arshia, Rubina. And yeah, what a fantastic presentation.
Thank you, Tara.
It was just wonderful to go through it again and see it through your eyes. I just wanted to add a couple things as they came out. One, I mean, just more like a share. One is I actually met Zarina at Nasrin's in Baroda. And so I remember when,
great.
yeah, I was staying some days at Nasrin's place and Zarina was going to come to visit. So I remember hearing about Zarina from Nasrin that, you know, ye, aise hai, and all that. And then later on, I got to know Zarina well in New York for 30 years, actually. And I really wanted, I'm so moved by your presentation, Rubina. I wanted to really add that from the time I knew Zarina, she was talking in guarded language about her coming there. And she was getting ready for it. And I remember at that time thinking of it like, oh, band karo kind of thing. But what a brave position that was, you know? I mean, just on the existential level. I mean, how many of us really come to do it? It's even beyond a cultural thing. Yeah. It's such a sort of lone person finding their own facing it. And now that I'm older, I see what all that was. It's something that you cannot experience, but you come to a time in your life and you just marvel at this woman alone, sitting by herself day and night. And so it is a home that she's left behind, but also the home that is the eternal home that's going to. And I think you presented that beautifully. Thank you, Rubina.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you so much.
Can I just say one thing, please, everybody? And this is a trigger from Tara's, thing. And I think that, when we know this, we also know, and this is a conjecture on my part, Rubina, that whether the gold entered her work from this time onwards, from this sense of actually, that death, this understanding that, death is imminent. The entry of gold, because, gold has all the old properties of healing, as well as, it's an energizing. It's a very, traditionally gold has those properties.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
that's true. Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's not the use of gold because it's a material that signifies wealth, but it's a material that actually is a material that can be healing and that can have a source of energy. So in the traditional things that these were embedded in our understanding of gold also. So I'm just want to just point that out.
You're very right.
Yeah.
And that's the time actually, because when she was dealing with Noor as a subject, it was also because the darkness was growing.
Yes,
darkness.
exactly. That's what I want to make that connection.
Yes, that's true.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right.
I personally feel I forgot so many things, and it is an endless topic. So it cannot be covered in 1 hour. But I hope that some of the things at least got to whoever was listening to the presentation.
Arshia, you're on mute.
So just to add one thing, and this is what I noted, that Zarina was very careful about her legacy, and she thought about this very carefully. So as early as 2003, she was always wanting to place her work in the museum, in the Morgan Library. She was really worried about her work. So I do know that, she was very afraid what would happen to her work, where would it go? And already from then onwards, she was already placing her works in different collections or wherever she wanted them to be. So in a way, maybe that's something that really stayed with me in terms of legacy, which also kind of prompted me that, how does one want to be remembered? And, in the position that I am, it is not my place to curate a show about her work, but as a friend and somebody who, who understood her, I know that, remembering her work in the way that through the other artists is possibly the most wonderful, contribution that can ever take place. So, which is also because I did really think about why Ufuk and why should I do it? I mean, many people were associated in her life. And I mean, this is just one poignant gesture because I do remember the idea of legacy and how she wanted to be remembered and that she will was something of great, importance and significance to her. So just, as a minor comment.
But I'm very happy that the Kiran Nadar Museum of Art has really collected such a substantial collection we have of Zarina's works. This is also the reason I could do an exhibition like this. Of course, there were loans that came from Renu, Tarana, and many others, Nitin, Bhayana, and others. But having a substantial collection, you can actually be with the works as much and as long as you want to be, to really sit and look at them and feel them and touch them and, think about them all the time. And I feel that it's going to be incredible whenever the new museum building happens. There would be a permanent space for Zarina's works in the building there, and I think that is a tribute to the artist. I think it must stay in public consciousness. People should be able to come and see the works, enjoy the works. Unfortunately, the show that I did at KNMA shut down 1 month after it opened because of the pandemic. The lockdown was announced and the museum had to shut down because we are in a mall. And a lot of people who really wanted to see the exhibition could not visit it. And I've been doing different iterations of my conversations and of the exhibition. Every time something new, of course, gets added to it as I work and get more involved with it. But the good part is that an exhibition can be documented, and now I'm coming out with a book that is about the exhibition that happened at KNMA. So hopefully the book will have some glimpses of what the exhibition was. But I think the exhibition was a great experience for me. In curating it, I felt very I was thinking of many things. If you would have noticed, I don't know whether I could not show many exhibition views. It's a very difficult exhibition to photograph because of its very subtle light, and the work itself is very small and subtle, and you have to have special lights to really photograph it. But if you would have noticed, all the pedestals that I designed in this exhibition, or the wall spaces, none of them are square or rectangular. They are all stretched, and they have very precarious edges, like diamond shapes, or on the wall, something like this, or a parallelogram, spaces that are just extending rather than spaces that are, the definite and fixed and rigid in their, and laying that out also for me was about this, that I want to talk about a very physical sense of home, and there are a very non-physical sense of home. And that's the way it unfolded in the exhibition as well. So so at the end, then the scent of the home is what remains, I would say. That's what it's that fragrance of that house that she lived with till the end. And I think for me, it's a very moving experience, an extremely moving experience. When I was feeling so sad that she could not even register that this exhibition was happening. And when I was planning, and just when we were planning to do a talk, she passed away, and then the exhibition was shut down. And that became her last exhibition, so to say, in her presence.
But it was a very moving experience. And also, I remember that there was an intimacy about the work in the way that you had placed them, which was kind of quite beautiful, very tangible. And I don't know, oftentimes, and I think this is one of the things that I do admire about your practice. And maybe it's the fact that you actually love the work, and it kind of comes through in the way that you put it together, like that the heart is there. And I felt that particularly the section on Zarina that you had curated was really, really poignant. And I mean, it was meaty, and one was able to really feel the works within one's body, which doesn't really kind of happen. And maybe it was the tightness of the space also within the four walls, so to speak, which kind of gave that kind of that intimacy to all of us. But we look forward to seeing, and it's wonderful that if you are dedicating, a section to her in the museum, and I think it's very much needed, and it's such an incredible body of work. And thank you so much for that, and this incredible talk this time, and everybody else also taking time. And with that, I'd like to invite Sunaina Kejriwal. Sunaina?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'd like to start by saying, Rubina, a big heartfelt thank you, really.
Thank you. Thank you,
talk. Sorry we couldn't have you in Bombay, but we will plan something in the near future. But thank you so much. You beautifully took us through Zarina's life journey and showed us in great detail how she evolved as an artist. And there were so many new nuances that we've understood, and understood how important home was to her, and how she translated her complexity of thought in such a simple and minimalistic way. And it just comes out beautifully, and it's quite mind-boggling. So thank you for that. You really put it across really nicely for us. Arshia, a big thank you for putting together the show and for moderating the session today. I also want to thank all the artists who participated in the show. Through your interpretations, I think you really captured the essence of Zarina and brought her to life for us. So thank you for that. And to our audience today, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this talk as much as we did. The show concludes tomorrow at 7. So if you haven't had a chance to come and see it, please do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunaina. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you, Arshia. And thank you all, Anita, Tara, Shaku was also here, and others, all of you who have been part of it. Thank you very much for being here today. Thanks a lot.